Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Easy Programming. I'm Naveen Mishra and I will continue teaching you how to write programs in C language. In this video, we'll study about functions. Functions are a very important topic in programming languages as when the situation occurs that you have to write programs for more than 100, 200, 300 lines, then you should modularize your code using functions. So let's start with topic functions. To understand when we need functions, let's understand the situation. Now, until now, whatever you have studied like arrays, loops, variables, keywords, if else, switch case, these are enough to implement any kind of program or any kind of software. Now, during the creation of large softwares, you might need to reduce the code or structure the code in such a way that you find it easier to understand and implement the program. So let's understand the situation first. Let's say we have a software related to a school management system where we have to write a software or create a software for school management using which they can add record of students, add record of fees, add record of teachers, add record of salaries. So when we think about school management system, they are particularly divided into two categories, that is related to students and related to staff. Then if we modularize the code further, so now students can be categorized like high school students and senior secondary students, and similarly staff can be modularized or categorized into teaching staff and non-teaching staff. Then further, teaching staff and non-teaching staff can be divided into permanent and temporary staff. If you start writing this whole code inside one main function, then this code might be very lengthy or will be very hard to code. You can write the whole program inside main, but writing all these modules in the single main function can cause you a lot of problems. Two main problems are finding errors or bugs. Now, when you write such a big program, you will surely make some mistakes, and finding these mistakes will be a lot harder if your main function is of thousands of lines. Okay, and compiling and understanding the program also becomes easier or difficult in this situation if you are putting everything inside the main function. Now let's suppose you have written the code and there is a problem in inserting the data for the teachers, but rest of the code is working. Since you have done all the code inside the main function, your program will not compile at all. So in such cases, we can use functions. So let's start with comparison of approaches like the same code here. Without function, what you will do is you will write all your code here, like for students, for teachers, for salaries, for fee, results, attendance. This code will be of 1,000 lines. Finding errors will be hard, and understanding the program will also become difficult. But if you do it using functions, so you can create all this code in separate functions like function student, teachers, salaries, fees, result, and you can write the code related to the student module here, write the code related to teachers module here, and so on. And you can call these modules here inside the main function. Okay, by doing so, if you have an error at your teacher's module that you cannot insert a teacher because of some problem, the rest of your code is working fine, that you can show to your school management and work according to that. So this approach is easier and must be utilized in order to perform large programs or 1,000 lines or more than 1,000 lines program. Okay, to do this we have functions. So let's study what are functions. Some languages say functions like C and C++, whereas Visual Basic say it procedure, whereas Java or Android say it is method. But they do the same thing. Functions or methods are the same thing. Okay. Now, what are functions? So functions are small modules of a large program. Large program like student management system can be modularized into small parts using functions. Functions divide the large program into modules, right? Using functions, finding errors or bugs becomes easier, and it also increases the understanding and readability of the program. Understanding the code becomes a lot easier if you are implementing it using functions. Functions are write once and call anywhere any number of times approach of writing programs. This we usually do, or during your development as a developer, program developer, you will do this lot of time, that you will write your code once and you can utilize it or call it anywhere at any number of times. Okay, generally in programming, functions are recognized by these round brackets. Wherever you see these round brackets, these will be called functions. Okay, these brackets can also be used inside expressions like this, where you have to perform the calculation a plus b multiplied d minus e. Here, to increase the precedence of plus, you will put it inside the round brackets. But if you leave this concept, most of the times your these brackets will represent functions. Okay, functions can be generally categorized into two types of functions. One is library function and one is user defined functions. Okay, just a second. Now let's study. First of all, let's start with the library functions. The library functions are the functions that are already defined in your header files, like stdio.h, conio.h, stdlib, that is library.h, math.h. These header files, you have to include them, and you must remember the name of the function, how many arguments are required, and is your function returning any kind of value or not. If you remember these things, then you can easily use these functions. Example of the functions are, we are constantly using printf and scanf functions, which are stored inside stdio.h header file. uh, in the previous video I have told you about the strings, so these functions were stored there. Math.h header file is used, where square root, power, sine, cos, tan, log, lots of functions are stored there in the math.h. I will write a program for you guys where I will implement math.h file for you. Okay, so let me start program to call the square root and power function of math.h. So I will declare header file standard input output.h. Then I will declare math.h because I'll need these functions. I'll start my main function, put a return zero method here. I'll have some variables like n, p, and p. Okay, n, and I'll ask the number printf, enter any number. I'll write a scanf now and read the number %d comma and n, and then I'll use this square root function. Now to use the square root function, what I have to do is I have to write the name square root and then pass the value of which I want to calculate the square root, like n, and whatever answer it is, I will store this answer in my variable int ans, that is answer, and I'll print this answer, printf the square root of %d is %d, that is n, is, let's try to run this file first, library functions.cpp, compile and run. Okay, just a second. There you go. 5 and the square root of 5 is 2. Just a second. Is there any problem? Okay, yeah, it is working fine, absolutely fine. Let me try again. Square root of 16 is 4. That 4 into 4 equals to 16. Okay, and if I say 25, then the square root of 25 is 5. All right, so there you go, the square root function is working. Now to calculate the power, what I'll do is I'll write printf, enter the base and power, and I'll pass two scanf. One will be for p and base, first base, and then for power, and I'll use ans equals to power function, and I'll pass b comma p. So this power function takes two arguments, one is base and another is power. So 2 raised to power 3 equals to 8. So 2 is your base and p and 3 is your p, and the answer 2 raised to power 3 8 will be stored in the answer variable. Okay, I'll print this message, ns will be as it is, the power of d to %d is b comma. Let's try and run this file. First of all, for square root, like I'll say 25, square root is 5, then base is 2, power is 3, 2 raised to power 3 equals to 8. So these are the two functions that I have implemented in the in this program. Okay, so this is the example of library functions, string functions. We have already done that, and now let's continue about the other functions, that is user defined functions. Now, at the start of this video, I have given you a situation like school management system, and you have to write the modules for these. Those modules that are written by you will be user-defined functions. So let's see what are user-defined functions. These are the functions that are defined by the user according to their requirements. Like school management system, I have divided my situation into two separate parts. So there you go for the user-defined functions. You can implement there. The functions are defined as well as called by the user. You have to define it as well as call it. In the program that I have written earlier, I have just called the function, not written it. How it will work, I have not mentioned it. I was just using it. Okay, but if you are implementing user defined functions, then you have to define it as well as call it. Based on the return type, arguments or parameters, the user defined functions can be divided into three categories. No return type with no arguments, no return type with arguments, return type with arguments. Okay, so what are return type, what are arguments? Actually, whenever you implement the functions, if you are creating your own function, then your function must have three parts like this one: return type, function name, and arguments. Arguments are also called parameters. So arguments or parameters are one of the same thing. So whenever you are implementing a function, your function must have these three things. Okay, let's study in detail about these functions. So first of all, return type. Whenever you create a function or you define a function, this function will be called from somewhere in the same program, which will be called the calling function, and the function which is called the called function. Now, if the called function after execution wants to send some kind of data or result to the calling function, then return type is used. If the function is not returning any kind of data, then you can pass void as a return type, which simply means empty or nothing. That is, your function is not returning any kind of a value. So if you are saying void add, then void means this function does not have any return type. And if you are saying int add, this means your function add have a return type int and will return an integer value as a result. Now, when you are implementing your return type functions, then your return type must match with the type of data that you are passing. And your function must have a return statement in your definition. For example, you are writing int add. Now, in the definition of this function, you must have return 10, return 20, return 30, something like that, that is integer. Okay. Example of return types are, you can write any data type like void, int, char, float. Okay. You can type a class name, structure name, or array name as a return type. Okay, but make sure your return statement also passes the same kind of data. Okay. If you are not mentioning any kind of return type, for example, in main functions, we are just saying main, we are not passing the return type, then by default compiler consider int as a return type. So make sure that you pass a return type for yourself. Okay. Now let me teach you in a graphical way that how these functions work. Now let's say you're writing a program inside the main function. So your main functions look like this one. You're writing all the code written here. Now let's say you have created a function and you want to call them. So you will call the function like this one. This is the function name and these are the arguments passed. During the call of the function, you never pass the return type. Okay. So as soon as you write this line, wherever you have written this function, your control will be transferred here, and this is called function call. Compiler will execute the main function. Inside the main function, compiler will see the name add function. The compiler will find the add function and transfer the control here. After executing this add function, compiler will return back. Since I have passed void here, so empty return will be made. That is, nothing will be passed from the add function to the main function. And if we do this like add, and we're calling the function, and your function contains this int return type, then it must have a return statement like return z, and whatever is returning returned by this add function will be stored back in this C variable. So this is the example of no return type, and this is the example of return type. In no return type, void is passed. In return type, int is passed, and you have to have a return statement inside the definition of the function. Okay, now you see here return value is passed. Now let's talk about the second thing, function name. Return type, function name, and arguments. I have explained return type. Now let's start function name. Function name is the any legal name that you must give to your function. All the other functions in the program will recognize your function using this name, like add, sum, multiply, div, get, show, factorial. These are the legal names that you can give to your function. Make sure that your function name is unique and have a valid identifier. That is, you cannot create a function named as int is a data type. Okay, so make sure about these things. So you must have a return type and have a function name. Now let's talk about the arguments or parameters. What are arguments or parameters? They are defined inside these round brackets. And if your function contains arguments, then whoever calls it must pass the same number and same data type of arguments. Okay, so let's say you have a function named void add, and inside the round brackets you are passing int x comma int y. Then this function can only be called if you are passing two values, add bracket start 10 comma 20 integer values. Okay, if you do not want to pass any kind of arguments or parameters to your function, then you can left this function brackets totally empty, or sometimes you can say void. Void means empty or nothing. So function with no arguments, let's see how it works. Now you see here I have written this add function and I have not passed any kind of value here, so I am not passing any argument from here. Now this function definition also does not have any arguments, so simply your control is transferred from here to here. Okay, now you see here I have passed add 10. So 10 is the value that I'm passing from here to this function. Now this function contains an argument. Now this int 10 belongs to integer data type. So in the definition of the function, I have passed an int x variable, declared an int x variable. Now this 10 value will be passed to this x variable. So this is a function with arguments. This is an example of function with arguments, and this is an example of function with no arguments. Okay. Now once you know about the function, return type, definition, return type, name, and arguments, when you start implementing this program when you start implementing these functions in the program, again you have to mention three things. Okay, during the implementation of functions you must have three things: function declaration, which is also called prototype, function definition, and function call. So you must have these three things. Function declaration is optional. If you are defining the function first and then calling it, then you do not need a function declaration or prototype. But if you're calling the function first and defining it later, then you need a function declaration. So this is an optional part. Function definition is must. Whatever your function is doing is defined inside the function definition. And function call, wherever you need these set of statements to be executed, these are defined inside the function call. So wherever you call this function, these set of statements will be executed there. Okay, so this is a lookalike or example of declaration, like void add. You must specify return type, function name, and arguments, and pass a semicolon. This means your function is declared. When you define the function, your function definition must have these curly braces. So whatever declared here, remove the semicolon and place it here. This is the definition, and inside the curly braces you can write the code of your function. Now wherever you want to execute this code, you can call the function like this one. So during call you don't have to pass the return type, like here void. You don't have to pass the return type here, and as soon as you write these lines, the control will be transferred here and these lines will be executed at the same time. Okay, so when you implement the functions, you must remember the three things: declaration, definition, and calling. Okay, now let's see how the functions are useful or how you can do this. Here I have written a program to add two numbers and I have not used any functions. You guys know this. I have told you these things earlier in the previous videos. So this is a simple program to add the two numbers. If you want to implement it using function, I have written this whole code inside the definition here. Okay, and this is called function definition, and void add is the function definition. I have not passed any return type and I do not have any arguments. Now these statements will not be executed until you call this function. So I have called this function inside the main. Inside the main I have written this add function. As soon as the compiler executes the 13 lines, the compiler transfers the control to the fourth line, then execute these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. After executing from 10th line, it will go back to this 13th line. I have called the function twice to tell you that you can call the function as many times as you want. Okay. So these are the programs that you guys can do by yourself. Okay. To swap two numbers using functions, to swap two numbers using functions with arguments, and so on. So these programs you guys can do it by yourself. Okay. I will write a program for you guys so that you guys can come to know how to write a program. Let me open Dev-C again. Now let's say I want to calculate the simple interest. So I'll say hash include stdi.h. Now I will not pass any return type and I will not have any argument. So I'll say void, my function name is simple interest, and I'll pass no parameters here. Okay, I'll write the code here: float, p for principal, r for rate, t for time, si for simple interest. I'll ask the values of principal, rate, and time. Enter principal, rate of interest, and time in years. I'll pass scanf with 3% f, and p, comma, and r, comma, and t. I'll put the formula here: p multiply r multiply t divide 100. And I'll print this on printf slash n simple interest equals to %f comma si. Simple interest. Now your program cannot work without a main function. So if you try to compile this program, it will give you an error message like you do not have any main function. So I'll add a main function here and I'll simply say return 0. Even then your function will not do anything because you have not called your function. Now you have to call the function. So I'll say simple interest. As the name of my function is simple interest, I'll copy this code. So whatever written in the definition, name of the definition is used here, and press the semicolon. Now this is the function call and this is the function definition. Okay, let's compile and run this program. Now there you go, your function is working fine. I'm passing 10,000, rate of interest is 5 for 1 year, and there you go, simple interest is rupees 500. Okay, now I can call it as many times as I like. So this is the advantage of creating a function, that you will write once your code and you can call it as many times as you want. Okay, so you see here it works fine. Okay, now I have defined the function first and then called the function. Now what if I do this? I define, just a second. Let's cut this line and put it after main. So what I have done here is I have called my function first and defined my function later. Now there you go, it start giving you an error that simple interest was not declared in this scope. So you have to declare your simple interest. What you will do is you will copy this code and place a semicolon there. So this is your declaration. Declaration is only required if you are calling the function first and then defining it. Okay, so compile and run. There you go, it works fine. Okay, so this is how you guys can implement your functions. Okay, that's it from this video. In the next video I'll write some more programs related to functions and will tell you about recursion and how to call the inner functions or nesting of functions. That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching this video. Keep on liking, subscribing and sharing my videos. Thank you very much. See you in the next video. Cheers.